This is Andre Bronk with Pelgar USA from Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, and you are listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
This edition of the Pest Geek Podcast is brought to you by Pest Routes. Pest Routes, supercharge your company with Pest Routes, the #1 pest control software to help you dominate your goals. Visit them at pestroutes.com and get your free demo.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube, we're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And now for today's topic.
This is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. Frank, thank you very much, as always, for allowing me to be on the Pest Geek Podcast. But I had a request about talking regarding German cockroaches in residential accounts and how we can deal with those and possibly in small commercial. And frankly, it's not that much different than what you would do in a commercial account, because you still have human habitation with food and water and habitat going on, excuse me, and you also have to deal with an insect that absolutely loves to live with us because we provide everything that they need. So when I've got a residential account, let's say it's a brand new service, I'm going in for German cockroaches, and this is something I've done, oh heavens, it seems like a million times in my career, starting in the early 1970s. And when I go inside, one of the things I learned very, very early on is to interview the people involved in the process, the residents, whether it's an apartment or a home, to find out where the insects really are. And oddly enough, some of the most observant individuals in a residential situation are the kids. And you have to remember that question. The most important question you ask a client when you're doing the investigative process, and it's a question that was taught to me, good Lord, now probably 35 years ago, from Austin Frischman, and that is the regards to the question, where is the last place you saw, and fill in the blank of the pest. So with regards to roaches, it's where was the last place you saw a roach? And the client's going to think about that for a minute. Maybe you're standing in the kitchen, the living room, or someplace else in the home. You're going to see their eyes light up, and they're going to go, oh, yes, they were in the kitchen, or they were in the bathroom, or they were wherever. And the best thing you can do with that client at that moment in time is look at them and say, please show me. Because when you then go to that place, you've been truly welcomed into their solution. They want you to help them. They're trying to show you where they're seeing things. So pay attention to what they're telling you and go into that area and take a look. And this may be a place where you want to put a monitor or two. Now, it's no different than doing the forced monitoring process on a restaurant or commercial account. It's just, in most cases, less monitors. And what you want to do is, with the client's cooperation, it's their home, it's their castle, it's their palace, it's where they have the most peace of mind with their family. You want to monitor that area, so you have to pay attention big time to the distribution of children and pets in that environment. So go ahead and get that monitor placed. Make sure it's secured in such a fashion that nobody's going to bother it. As far as the type of monitor, I prefer a ramped style monitor that's easy to put into action. And in my particular case, I prefer the ProPest monitors and JFOs because when I take them out of the little plastic sleeve that they're in and unwrap them, they're wrapped in cellopack 10 at a time. I can pop that thing into shape in a moment. I don't have to fiddle around trying to fold it or anything else. I just pop it open, pop the tabs together, done. Tear off the release paper, of course, but I can place that out where I need to so I can make observations. Now, you don't necessarily have to leave these in place for months or weeks, particularly if it's an active roach situation. What you're trying to do is to figure out the distribution of the roaches in that space. And keep in mind, as a professional, you may not be the first exterminator in that house, or maybe they've done a lot of things on their own before they've contacted you. So you've got a population, especially if they were spraying stuff, that could be somewhat disrupted, and you need to find out what the actual distribution of the insect is. So based on the observations you're making during that little tour, where was the last place you saw, keeping in mind the kids are very good at remembering these things, go ahead and put those devices out, taking care to make sure the children and pets don't encounter them. Granted, they're non-toxic, but nobody wants to deal with a glue board with a little child or a pet. That can be painful and heartbreaking, so you don't want to do that. So make sure they're as convenient as possible to the distribution that's been identified, but you don't put any of those folks in danger. Now, as far as once you've decided or found out where they are, and you may let those traps be in place for a few days, that's fine. Go ahead and set a process up with your client. It may be one of those situations, you put them out today and come back tomorrow. Once again, that's fine. Just go based on what's best for that particular client. And you can judge that when you're there. But once you return and you see what the distribution is, you look at this going, okay, wait a minute. How is this property maintained? Because if it's a very neat, tidy property, and I've seen this, and I've gone into particularly apartments, people are frustrated, I've made some catches, I've done the observation thing, and in those real clean units, the first weapon I'll attack the roaches with is a vacuum. And I remember doing an apartment complex a number of years ago, and we had very clean apartments because for the most part it wasn't an old folks apartment complex, but it was for retirees. Very active, all the units were clean. This particular complex only had about 70 units in it, and every one of them was just as tidy as could be, but they were fighting German roaches. So as I was going in with the PMP, doing the work on this, we identified distributions pretty easy, found some insects in our traps. We went ahead and took the drawers out around the refrigerator and the stove area because it was pretty much the same in every apartment. And keep in mind the stove and the refrigerator, their appliances, they produce warmth. And sure enough, in the framework that was up against those units for the cabinets, when the drawers were taken out, we found lots of roaches in there. Front lip, back lip, all the way around drawer frames and things like that. Now, the first thing we did was vacuum those insects up. We could have sprayed them. That was a method that a lot of people used at that time. But what would have happened? We probably would have scattered the population and moved them around. So what we did in these clean apartments is go ahead and vacuum. Picked up a lot of what we could, and right away, the individuals living there were going, well, you've given us so much relief with just the vacuum. And yes, we had. Now, as far as products at that time, this was kind of in the infancy of using cockroach bait. And in that particular case, we put out what was at the time Stapleton's paste, now called MRF 2000. It's sold by Nice's. And we put it out with putty knives. And so the bait placements were larger than what you would get out of a bait gun. But, it dropped the populations in those units dramatically. And I mean, it went to nothing, because the way we judged it was what the complaints were from the individuals. And we did have roach traps out there that were, going to very low or zero counts that we kind of kept an eye on. But this is a good way to do the work, and we have better tools now than we had then. We have a better roach trap, and that ProPest trap with the ramps on it. And of course, you all know, if you've got a commitment ramp on the trap, it should increase or will increase your catch rate, because the roaches go up the commitment ramp and drop onto the glue surface. It works very, very well. Now, as far as the bait compound, a lot of improvements have been made in the bait compounds over the original MRF MRF product that we used back then. Now, I recently had some residential situations where the house was rough. Small house. In this particular case, there were foster children involved in the house, so we really had to give these folks some relief. Now, in that particular situation, the PMP made the choice of a different product, more along the lines of a more modern bait, say a Vert. And so we went ahead and did the distributions of product in there. We weren't going to be able to introduce any cleaning. That wasn't going to happen. And so vacuuming was kind of, if I wanted to vacuum in those cabinets and spaces around the stove and around the refrigerator, I had to dig my way through pots and pans and stuff. And I mean, they were all over the place, just packed. There was no way I was going to attack that with a vacuum, because it wasn't a clean environment in the first place. And there's been a lot of work done lately with treating in these situations where maybe we haven't got the highest level of maintenance in residential. And Deanie Miller has done a lot of this with her work through the university system that she's with, and then going into low-income housing. And she's proving once again that the type of work that was done with the MRF 2000 in low-income housing was a valid process in its day. And she's bringing this back to the forefront and reintroducing it to a whole new group of PMPs, and sure enough, it's having success. In this particular case, we applied the bait products as per the label, and I know one of them was a Vert, the dry flowable. We used that where we could, and it wasn't going to make a mess. And we also used a gel product, and for the life of me, it just escapes me as to which one that was. But we made the distribution of product, and I remember I had the opportunity to go back to the house the following day, and I had done some of those bait placements. And I went back and checked through that kitchen for those bait placements, knowing where I had put them in cracks and crevices and that type of thing. It had framework around drawers where I could get to it. I put the little dab of product on top of there. And you know what? All of the bait placements that I had made myself, because I knew where they were gone. There was nothing left. The roaches had consumed all of it. And so we kept an eye on that house. And we kept an eye on that situation. And lo and behold, the roach population dropped. Dramatically dropped. Now, yeah, we had some occasional flare-ups in there because the insects were into all kinds of boxes and storage that were being shifted around and moved. There were things coming in and out all the time with the foster kids. But you know what? We brought it back to a very livable situation for the people that were in that structure. And frankly, reintroduction was taking place, I suspect, every week or so, when new children were introduced to the property and removed for someplace else. So it was a rough situation, but we got it taken care of. Now, the other thing you want to look at in those residential properties, and once again as with commercial, is don't neglect the use of dust. And we have some very good dust products that are long-term in voids and cracks and crevices that are not going to flare anything up. They're not going to move insects around. So take a look at products like Nivor D. I've talked about this before. I could put it out as a liquid, I could put it out as a foam, I could put it out as a dust. That product is golden. And if you use it in the right kind of duster, and I mean if you're doing anything outside of a small space, you really need to have a Technicide duster, because that's the unit you can meter the product in with. There are other dusters that produce volume, but you have pressure dusters, you have various types of pump dusters. They all have their place. Small hand dusters have their place. But if you're working in a consistent space and you need to do a distribution of product in the quickest time possible, the most efficiently, Technicide duster is the best tool. If you're looking at hand dusters, the little guys, we have a variety of those. And frankly, if I'm working out of a service kit, I have one of those in a service kit. So that if I need to work in a small space, use a little bit of dust, I can. But for anything larger than a section of wall, I'm taking the Technicide duster. If I have to do volume dusting underneath something, I'm going to take maybe a pressure duster, or I'm going to take one of the pump style dusters. But dusters are just like screwdrivers and wrenches in a toolbox. You need different sized pieces of equipment for various types of work that you're going to be doing. Now, the other thing you may want to look at in that residential situation is foam, because some areas can be foamed very effectively. Water walls and things such as that, you may want to foam those instead of dust them. Take a look at the situation. We now have a variety of foaming devices for that. I think the most common that most of us are running into, we've read the ads and seen them used in commercial accounts, are the foamers available from NICES. The TruTech foamers, the most common when somebody has a power foamer is going to be probably the PowerCard 2000. Good piece of gear. You can do a lot of foaming work with it. Now, if that's too big for you, if you don't have the real estate to carry it, or you've got other stuff you're working with, maybe that piece of equipment doesn't work in some residential accounts. In that case, you want a foamer that's a little bit smaller. We have little tank-style foamers. Gardner has a new one, for example, that's very handy. If you want to go smaller than that, Aerofog has essentially a micro line now of application tools: dry, liquid, and foam. And you can take a look at those. I like them because they're handy, and they also have a belt system, so I can put everything into my belt pouches and maybe have a service kit as well, and be fully equipped for whatever I need to do in those residential or light commercial situations without revisiting the truck or bringing things in on trolleys, or I have to leave them parked somewhere, lock them up, and keep them handy, and that type of thing. So in residential situations, you have a huge number of options. And I would recommend that you always have the monitoring system put together for yourself. Have those monitors tucked away. Now, there are monitoring devices you can use that will hold the cardboard monitor. VM Products has a new one now. It's very low line. You can use sections of a monitoring trap in there, and it tucks away. It's very shallow and flat. It hides beautifully. You can also use the fly bait or the insect bait stations that VM has, because you can lock those. And I can see maybe installing one of those under a sink with monitoring boards in it if you don't want to use insecticide, and it'll bring the insects in because of the scent coming off of those boards. The JF Oaks products do have an attractant built into that glue, and so you can get insects coming in there and monitor and only apply as you need to. But what I'm saying here is, go into that residential situation, find out what's happening. You have the tools, you have the equipment. It's critical that you communicate with the client so that you understand and they understand what's really happening. And the bottom line of this whole thing is get in there and give them back peace of mind in the place that they live, and take away the fear factor from those insects, be it roaches or whatever else you might encounter that you're dealing with. but peace of mind is what they're looking for. And you can provide that if you approach it properly. And so I hope in the last few minutes, I've at least given you a little bit of guidance on what you can do in a residential account for German cockroaches. It's no different than any other human space. All human space is valuable for one reason or another. And when you go into it as a professional, your job is to protect people and property from pests. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind giving that client peace of mind. You'll do the right thing, you'll make a good living doing this work, and you'll protect the public. And so with that, Frank, I turn it back to you, sir. You folks all have a good day. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.